everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor. I'm happy to be with all of you today. I hope everyone is having a blessed day. We're in the octave of Pentecost, and I wanted to provide another opportunity where you guys get an insight into my brain, into what I'm thinking about, and I created this thumbnail, which I have up here, which kind of sums up a little bit of what I've been thinking, just like why I have sometimes trouble uh, staying focused on one thing. And in some ways, I don't know, maybe I have some level of ADHD. I don't know. I don't know if you can have some minor level of ADHD. I don't really know. But my brain is often all over the place. And you might be wondering, what does JFK, Blessed Charles, Evelyn Waugh, and James II all have in common? And I guess in some aspect, they're all Catholics, of course. JFK wouldn't be considered a very good Catholic, but he was a Catholic. James II, a convert and then King of England and Scotland and Ireland. Evelyn Waugh, one of the greatest authors of the 19th century, 20th century. And then Blessed Charles, Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary. Now, you might think, okay, so all of them have some level of Catholicism. Of course, that's basically, that is an element. But I bounce back between, it's like, back sorry. It's like bouncing around different worlds. JFK is a really interesting figure to me because he is he stands out as someone who could be a representative of Catholicism, but in a certain way, he's also just a representative of a Catholicism that didn't really succeed, right? It's his work may have been successful in some ways politically. He may have been uh, a person who is able to break through for Catholics in political life, but since he said no to his faith affecting his political decisions, at least he said that on the surface, he it provided an example that was not good for Catholics as a whole, because even as Archduke Edward von Habsburg has said, that people have looked upon the Europeans have looked at JFK previously and have looked to him and said, okay, maybe this is how we should be acting, because of course America has been a great leader of Christendom. Of course, I say that only insofar as the remnant of Christendom, which is known as the West. Of course, the United States has never really been a leader of true Christendom, which is very sad for us in its own way. And JFK also was assassinated, which in some ways, people view him somewhat like a martyr. I don't know what a martyr of, to be honest, because he can't really be a martyr for Catholicism. Is he a martyr of the liberal way of thinking? Maybe. There aren't a lot of liberals in the left anymore. Of course, there are a lot of liberals in conservatism, as we've discussed what conservatism is previously. But JFK is, someone you can think maybe fondly of in the past, because you probably didn't really experience his presidency at all. So that's one way to look at it. I'm very interested in how the Kennedys came to power, and I hope to do some research into that in the future. But that's one thing that has gained my interest as of late. James II is very much a representative of Catholicism in the recusant era. Of course, it's illegal to be Catholic, but he's king of England and Scotland. It's illegal in England, but and of course they throw him out because of it, which at least makes some sense because they threw out his father for upholding an episcopal church instead of a puritanical church, which I mean it wasn't the church, of course. It was a Protestant church, but Charles the First believed that it had apostolic succession. So in some ways, it was upholding the sort of this Protestant or view that, or sorry, it was upholding a what was considered a Episcopal church that also had the apostolic succession. So in some ways, the faith had been brought down to them. At least that was their concept. But of course, we know that by that time, the episcopacy had no apostolic succession, of course, because they had killed many of their legitimate priests as well as removed the bishops that were also legitimate. Now, he is a harkening back to sort of a kingdom that was much more decentralized. We live in a very centralized world. Of course, he was not, it was still a Protestant country. So therefore, the monasteries had already been destroyed, and there was a lot of damage done that Henry VIII and many of his successors, not all of them, because you had Queen Mary and Charles the First and Charles the Second, really didn't do much in the way of amplifying what had already happened, and in some ways they were trying to fix it quietly, even if it wasn't something they expressed very often. And you have Evelyn Waugh. Evelyn Waugh represents the literary and historical interests that I have, sort of from the he is someone who is a very deep thinker. He was a very idealistic, and in some ways he was extremely cranky and extremely difficult to be around. And that's one of those things that I have to attempt to avoid. I have to attempt being the cranky person. I think it would be very easy for me to become that because of my personality type, but I do my best to try and overcome that if possible. I mean, I think it's possible by the grace of God, of course. But Evelyn Waugh wrote incredibly beautiful things such as Brideshead Revisited. He also wrote a book that I started reading on St. Edmund Campion, and he also wrote a book on St. Helena. Now, it's not that St. Helena book isn't a biography necessarily, because it's also sort of historical fiction, I guess you could say. And he's a satirist, and he's an example of incredible literary ability. And he's someone I really look up to. And of course, Tolkien is someone I look up to immensely. But Tolkien is one of those authors that kind of everyone knows. He's so popular that you don't really need to go, or there are plenty of people that have read him, and that's not something new. And of course, I've read his works, so not all of them. I haven't read everything. Laura, what do you mean by this? Only Kennedy was assassinated. They don't have that in common. if you're starting at the beginning. Um Anyways, so Wa represents this creativity that I would like to achieve in the future. Of course, I don't know if I'm capable of it, and I wish all of you might pray for me that I might find my literary ability. Well, I mean, I believe I have literary ability, but if I am able to put it in to the right place and in the right manner and in the service of God, that is my goal. Blessed Charles is kind of an opposite to JFK in a lot of ways. He was persecuted greatly. Obviously, JFK was assassinated, so in that sense, he was killed, and Blessed Charles actually wasn't. He wasn't. He didn't receive a red martyrdom. He received kind of white martyrdom. He died of sickness. Of course, it was because of his enemies that he died basically penniless. But he never abdicated, and he stood for his principles up against immense against immense odds. And obviously he was defeated, but in some sense he succeeded, because he succeeded on the spiritual level. He did not give himself up to be completely obliterated, body and soul. His body may have died, his body may have been lost, but he saved his soul. And Yves Lenoir also had a very difficult relationship with the Novus Ordo, and he had to do battle with himself, as he he was a very he was a man of beauty. He strived, or he wanted to create beauty, and he saw beauty in the mass. But the Novus Ordo, in so many places, and from his perspective, I think was bringing the vulgar into the church, which had a beautiful liturgy. And of course, he kept the faith, though it was extraordinarily difficult, which that might be an interesting thing. There's a book that I read with his letters, and between him and Cardinal Heenan, and it's very sad experience, but as well as his story may have in a lot of ways his story ended similarly to Blessed Charles, of course, though it was more of the mind and problems than the body. He suffered greatly from this, basically the trauma of Vatican II, and Blessed Charles suffered the sickness. And of course, I think Yves Lenoir must have, he died pretty young, so he must have died of some sickness, but I think it was brought on by the difficulties. I think I've heard people say that G.K. Chesterton was saved by by him being overweight and him dying young, because he was saved from enduring Vatican II, while Waugh was forced to endure it. And I think he's a very interesting case, because as we continue in times of liturgical unrest, kind of, and difficulties, I think we can hopefully look to Waugh, maybe hopefully in a joyful light, not in just a sorrowful or angry light, but in a joyful light, because I think he went through the darkness, and I hopefully we can revive the light. And of course, he was able to hear mass in Latin. I don't know if I believe it was a 1962 missal mass prior to his death, right before his death, which in some ways makes me think a little bit of Lord Marshmain from Brideshead Revisited. Of course, it's not the same circumstance, but it's quite interesting to me. So Katie understands. Her brain is the most scattered out of everyone. Yeah, it's just this is kind of these are all the things that are going through my head sort of at the same time. But I have to put my work in one direction. I have to focus sort of as best I can on one thing at a time and know that I can get to everything. But I'm gonna get to nothing if I just continue to sort of let myself be uh, carried away with every uh, with every sort of idea, with every sort of desire regarding the intellect. Though, of course, in some ways, my channel, what you're watching right now, what the podcast is basically watching my brain's fancies, what I what I'm most interested in. Of course, I bring in guests and in some ways I think God is basically guiding me through all these guests because I take them as it comes. I don't really have a huge plan going forward sometimes. Sometimes I have ideas but of different podcasts and people to reach out to, but a lot of this is just feels very providential about who I run into and who I make connections with, and a lot of the generosity that comes forward. So one of the great pleasures I've had is uh talking with Joseph Pierce a bunch on this channel, and tomorrow my next episode with Joseph Pierce is going to be released. It's about the Prince Caspian book. And of course, I wasn't, he's a great guest to have, and I need to be reminded of Narnia, you know, in order to interview him, because otherwise, I need to be, in other words, I need to be able to say, I know what I'm talking about, or I can need to ask the right questions regarding interviews. And if I'm not familiar with the topic, it's going to fall flat, of course. So I have to, sort of familiarize myself with the information. And sometimes I'm not in that area in which um, sorry, in which, sorry, basically, I needed to redirect myself from all these types of interests, all these types of thoughts, because, as I said, Blessed Charles, even the Wa, JFK, James II, I needed to redirect myself. And in some ways, it all came together, though, in the podcast. When you watch tomorrow, which I hope all of you will, you'll see that a lot of the stuff, it's just that I'm thinking about or that I'm interested somehow falls in on this, in together with my episode uh um with Joseph Pierce. Obviously, because I'm thinking about it, then I see connections between what I'm talking about. So between Prince Caspian and all the stuff I'm talking about. It is in some ways, Laura says, hard to believe JFK was murdered. I mean, I think it feels so long ago that maybe that's why. And yeah, how many presidents have been shot, uh and some, and murdered, some, um William McKinley was shot and killed. Theodore Roosevelt was shot, but he didn't die. He was shot during giving a speech, and he continued the speech after he had been shot, which is pretty amazing. Lincoln was shot and murdered. Reagan was shot, which I think, uh, I barely, can, th- you know, I don't know. It's hard to keep that in my head, if that makes sense. It feels like it's amazing, to be honest. I mean, it's terrible, but it's amazing. And then who else got shot? What other presidents have gotten shot? Um, yeah, the CIA. um, who else? Am I missing someone? Let me know in the comments if I'm missing someone who got shot. It's amazing to me that FDR died in office. Of course, he wasn't shot, but it's just amazing to me. Anyways, these are just things that fascinate me. Um, anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. If you want to sort of, if you want me to continue doing these types of episodes where I talk about what's interesting me at the time, and what I am going through, kind of, not, in the intellectual realm, of course, and maybe even the spiritual realm, but what I'm interested in, what I'm focused on. I'd be willing to continue sort of this as a series and stuff like that. um but yeah, no, that's, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Blessed Charles is just a man for the future, a man who has lived, of course, lived, what is it, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, what is it, 100 years, no, it's 100 years ago. He died 100 years ago. Yeah, this year, 100 years ago. But he gives us such a, he lived in such a modern world, and we live in such a modern world, that hopefully we can learn from him. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and God bless. Bye.